1969 to 1972, a time before most of us were alive. But these were some trying years for the United States of America. It was when, in the space race, we finally got ahead of the Soviet Union and landed man on the moon. To this date, we are the only country, we being America, to have landed anyone on the moon, and that's a crowning achievement for NASA and for the United States as a whole. But is it all a lie? Today, that's what we're going to be looking into.
I'm CerealOverdrive, and what I'm going to be doing here today is I'm going to be talking about the moon landing conspiracy theories. So I'm going to be going over sort of the hoaxes, or what people believe the hoaxes are, why the moon landings would have been faked, and how they could have been faked. I'm also going to give you guys my opinion on this, and I'm going to give you guys some facts regarding why a lot of these claims are actually proven to be false, a lot of the conspiracy claims. So let's just dive right into it. 1969 is sort of the midst of the Cold War. John F. Kennedy had been assassinated after saying that man would set foot on the moon and the United States would be the country to do that. He made this claim, he was assassinated, and that led the nation into a space race where we were sort of losing, to be honest. The Soviets were ahead of us. Not far ahead. A lot of people make it seem like the Soviets were way, way, way ahead of the U.S. The Soviets weren't. The Soviets were probably actually about even with the U.S. The difference was that the Soviet Union was willing to take risks that the U.S. was not. While the U.S. space program was very, very public, the Soviet space program was hidden, to the fact that the man who achieved many of these records, many of these firsts for humanity, was unknown until much, much later in the picture. This means that the Soviet Union could risk lives without telling anybody, right? It's a lot easier to claim wins when you don't have to claim losses. So while the Soviet Union did appear to be ahead of the United States by a lot, they actually weren't that far ahead. It was a neck-and-neck race. So at this point, the United States and the Soviet Union are competing in everything, right? We're going to war going to war in quotation marks with each other. We're fighting each other for defensive, military, and even space supremacy. So I think the space race is sort of the greatest example of that sort of fight. And a lot of people are claiming that the U.S. faked the moon landings because they believed that this was the win that they needed. NASA worked together with a bunch of organizations and thousands of people to create stages that were then used by various movie production companies or various movie production people to create a faked moon landing. So let's sort of get into everything behind this, okay? Again, big race between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. If we could have faked it and made it plausible, I don't doubt that the U.S. would have done it. But at the time, I just don't know if we had the technology. But let's just go over these claims. Let's go over some of the evidence that a lot of people put forward, and let's discuss it. So a lot of the things that people talk about are sort of the photographs and some of the oddities in the photographs. They talk about crosshairs being in the wrong place. They talk about photographs being low quality to hide details. And then they also talk about photographs being high quality, too high quality, because you can't bring a camera that good to the moon. Now, these 2 points really contradict each other, so let's just toss those out, because that's sort of like, if you're going to criticize NASA for having too low quality cameras and too high quality cameras, it's obvious that you're just criticizing whatever, right? Like, the photographs can't be too good and too bad. That just doesn't make sense in my mind. Anyways, one of the big issues is the crosshairs. Now, this is something that anybody who's used Instagram would realize is due to cropping. You see, photographs aren't always centered perfectly, especially when you're using film and you don't have that handy little screen in front of you when you're taking the photo, right? Like, you got a spacesuit, you don't have a screen. How are you supposed to take a selfie? Neil Armstrong had this problem, and because of that, he probably wasn't the best photographer, along with all his other cohorts, right? So the photographs were cropped. Obviously, there's been some editing done. There's probably some color correction done. It just makes sense. That's why like a lot of people, when they look at these pictures, they're like, this is washed out. There's a little C on some of the rocks, but that's actually probably a hair. Just like pull some hairs off your body and see if they curl up, and they're going to match that C. Like, just literally do it right now. Look at that image. There's an image of a C. People say that's a prop. Pull a hair out, put it down, and just look how that looks. Also, if you look at the original image of that rock, I don't believe it has that hair on it. That's because probably the copy of this was taken when there was a hair. It's been widely circulated, and a lot of people claim that this is a movie set and that little C was just left there. But let's be honest. If you're spending billions and billions and billions of dollars to put props out, do you really think you're just going to forget to flip it the right way? Especially because you don't see this all over the place. It doesn't make sense, in my opinion, and it really does look like a hair. Like, literally, I just pulled a hair out of my arm, put it down on the table, and like it looks like a C. So there you go. Now, the next one is that there's no stars, okay? And again, take your handy dandy cell phone, something that's more capable than any sort of Apollo computer is. Go outside in the middle of the night, take a picture of the sky. What do you see? You probably don't see any stars. That's because that's just not how cameras work. These guys weren't taking long exposures. They weren't going for star shots because you can see stars from Earth, right? It's very cool you see more stars from the moon, but I think the fact that we're on the moon is probably cooler. So, like, these cameras just weren't equipped to take pictures of the stars. So that's why you don't really see any pictures from the moon that have stars unless you're looking at long exposure photographs. So go ahead, Google that. Apollo 16 actually did take some long exposure photos, and you can see stars. So yeah, you can say Apollo 12 is fake because there's no stars, but then go look at some shots from the International Space Station, and usually there's no stars. Sometimes the stars are edited in, sometimes it's a long exposure, but if you look at just like a quick snapshot, there's going to be no stars. That's because that's just simple. That's like how cameras work. You can literally test this as much as you want. It's going to come out that way. All right, so another thing people complain about is like identical backgrounds. They complain that too many photos were taken. They complain that not enough photos were taken. They complain that you're only seeing the best photos. Now again, think about this, right? First off, too many photos, too few photos. Like, you can't complain about both. Like, I don't think either one of those is plausible. We had high-speed cameras back in the day, so like you can take a lot of photos all at once. That also explains why you see a lot of the same backgrounds. Also, these guys aren't running around the moon. Like Neil Armstrong, he took one long leap for mankind, or one small step for mankind, or whatever it is. One small step. He didn't take a million of them. He's not running a marathon over here. They do have a dune buggy, but that thing is not like your, Ferrari that you got parked down in your garage, right? The moon buggy doesn't go that fast, and, if you hit a bump, you could go off the moon. So, like, that's not going to be a thing. Anyways, the other thing people are talking about is the fact that like there's too high quality photos, there's low quality photos, the photos that are published are too good. Well, of course, NASA is going to touch up all of the photos. You can look it up. A lot of these photos were touched up and tweaked. And the reason they did that is because they want their photos to look cool. Back in the day when nobody had Instagram, everybody's like, why would you touch up a photo? Why wouldn't you show us the real thing? And now everybody's on Snapchat going like, oh my God, I got to touch up my photo, put on a little bit of makeup, and be like, looking my best. And I think Buzz Aldrin was just doing that back in the day, and he had a really good team doing it. So the photos look very professional and touched up because that's what you'd expect. If you're making a huge thing for mankind and you expect these photos to go down in history, why the hell wouldn't you make them look as good as possible? So next up, now that we've talked about the photographs, okay, actually one more photograph, and this is going to lead into the next like environment topic and all that. Everybody talks about the flag, okay? The flag is waving in the wind. You look at a picture and the flag is waving in the wind. It's glaring, it's obvious, it's in your face. And then you take that flag in each picture that you've got and you lay it over each picture. And guess what? They match up. Oh, think about that. If the flag's waving in the wind, how come I can take a composite of two photos, put them together, and you can see astronauts moving, but the flag doesn't? If the flag stays perfectly still, that means it's not waving in the wind. So literally, you guys can go look that up again. There's pictures online showing that the flags laid over each other, and you can see the astronaut moving in these photos. If you lay them over each other, you can see the cropping change, but the flag stays the same. So again, crazy, but that's just how it works. The next thing a lot of people talk about, and I've heard Joe Rogan even talk about that, is the Van Allen radiation belts, okay? So first off, there's 3 belts. A lot of people think there's just one. There's 3 belts. I looked this up. I don't think the astronauts went through the 3rd belt, but they did go through the first 2 belts. The most inner belt is the most dangerous belt out there, okay? And the astronauts went through that in a matter of minutes. The outer belt, which is significantly less dangerous, the astronauts went through in an hour and a half. Now, these astronauts did undergo a lot more radiation. It was slightly dangerous from them, but the iron hull of the spacecraft protected them. And also, as far as the photos go, and the reason that the photos were protected is because they were actually in an aluminum container. They were in, or I think it was a metal container. I don't know if it was actually aluminum, but they were in a container. That was enough to protect these photographs and the film from ambient radiation. A lot of people, Joe Rogan included, say like, hey, it doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense. Why would the photos not show any damage? The reason the photos don't show any damage is because they were protected in casing. You can see this if you look at any photo of any spacecraft that has actually left low Earth orbit. They've all gone through the Van Allen radiation belt. They're sending back photos. Some of them land and come back, and they have photos in them, and they successfully deposit those photos onto the Earth. That happens because we knew about this. We've protected ourselves from this. The U.S. actually tried to blow up the Van Allen radiation belt and made it worse. So, like, we always knew there's radiation up there, and in fact, part of it we put up there. So let's keep going, okay? The footprints are another one. A lot of people are complaining about the footprints and the lighting, okay? So the lighting is different because you have multiple lighting sources. This is something that a lot of people claim is like, hey, look at this, there's multiple lighting sources. Oh my God, it proves that. No, it doesn't. You've got the sun and the earth, right? Like two lights. Guess what? Like, think about that, right? Sunlight bounces off the moon. Now, if you're on the moon, you've got some light from the earth. You've got some light from the sun. The atmosphere isn't blocking it. You got two light sources. Also, everything acts a little bit differently in, I think in 0Gs. Like, it's just a little bit differently. The light comes off a little bit brighter and everything like that. And it's bouncing off of craters. It's bouncing off of the moon. Like, it's bouncing off of the surface. All sorts of stuff is bouncing around. Think about if you take a photo outside, okay? You put a mirror on under you, or let's say you just put a white piece of paper, right? Big white piece of paper under you, stand on that. It's going to look a little bit brighter than if you stand on a black piece of paper. That's how the moon works. The surface is more reflective. Look up in the sky at night, you can see it's reflective. And you've got different light sources. In fact, you've got the earth as a light source, and you've also got the sun. So go figure, the lighting looks different. If you look up physics and you become a physicist, you can actually prove that this all makes sense. I can't, but I can give you sort of the layman's explanation of it. Another one that people complain about is footprints. Footprints in the sand and the Apollo lander, and how it didn't leave any prints. It didn't leave any indentations. So one of the things to remember here is just think about any sort of landing principle. Elon Musk is launching spacecrafts into space right now, okay? He launches them up, they come down. Now, when these spacecrafts come down to successfully land, they actually have to slow themselves down before landing. The same thing applies to a lunar lander. The lunar lander needs to slow itself down before it touches onto the moon. This means that the indentation it makes is going to be a lot less. That's why Elon Musk doesn't have his lander blowing a hole through the ships that he's landing on. It just makes sense, folks. And now people are saying, well, there's footprints, but there's no lander footprints. Well, there are some lander footprints if you look in the pictures. There's little indentations, but not much. And the reason for that is if you look at pressure per square foot, which is what really matters, the astronauts have more pressure per square foot than the lander does. That's why you're seeing footprints from the astronauts and not from the lander. Now, if you weren't a physicist, if you were trying to fake this, you might actually put an indentation crater, because that's sort of what Hollywood thinks would be there. So either NASA had a lot of physicists on board to fake this, or the moon landings actually happened, and what people are claiming is, you know, a proof that it's fake is actually proof that it's real, because people are ignorant of how gravity reacts in a situation where there's way less gravity. It makes sense, though, because our whole lives we've been under 1G. Maybe go a little bit deeper into the ocean, you get like 1.1 Gs. Now think about you're on the moon. Things are just way different. It's crazy, I know, but that's just how it works, and it all makes sense from a physics standpoint. Some other issues people claim is like transmissions were too short, they were too long. There's some observatory in Australia that was relaying that was supposed to like relay things, but they didn't. But that was just because like the Apollo 11 moonwalk and a lot of this stuff, the times changed, right? Like at this time, even now, space is this unexplored thing. It's this thing we don't really know. Of course, there's going to be delays. If we can't get a flight from Chicago to London or from New York to London, and sometimes that's delayed 30 minutes, how much of a delay do you think there's going to be getting to the moon? the first time. I mean, it's crazy to think that everything would go off without a hitch. So yeah, like it just, if you really think about it, the technology at the time was extremely, extremely primitive, but we did manage to land on the moon. There's a lot of things out there that say that we didn't, but a lot of this stuff can be disproven with a little bit of research. And that's what I've been giving you guys here today. I've been telling you how everything worked and why, just why, from a standpoint of physics and from a standpoint of photography, a lot of this stuff is actually proven to be true. Okay, NASA did erase the tapes, but that's not something they do if they faked it, right? If they faked it, they'd be able to just release the tapes. I mean, hell, if NASA wanted to release real moon tapes right now and claim they were real, they could easily do it. They could CGI the whole thing. No one would know the difference. I mean, heck, they could just take that movie Apollo 13 that was made, copy that, pay Fox Studios a couple $2 billion to keep their mouths shut, and just play that. Like, nobody would know. Look at the graphics from that movie. Like, that was made way back in the day. You think they couldn't do better nowadays? My God, they could put it together an amazing fake video. But they came out and said, hey, we accidentally messed up and we might have lost the tapes. We might have actually re-recorded over them. And the fact that they admit that almost proves it's not fake, in my opinion. This is just from like a personal standpoint now, but it makes sense, right? Like, if they're faking it, you think at some point there'd be some guy at NASA that would like go to Trump or Bush or whoever's in charge at the time and be like, hey, listen up. We faked it. We lied. The moon rocks, we actually just pulled them out of some dude's backyard and like threw them at the Soviets, and they didn't notice. Go figure. But people want footage now. Can we just doctor something up? Like, get one of those CGI experts in here, have them put it all together, and then just shoot him in the head and release it to the public? And, you know, Obama or Bush or Trump would be like, yeah, sure, dude, just get it done. And then, you know, get someone to kill that dude, then get someone to kill the dude who killed the dude, and then we're going to kill you, and no one will ever know. And that's what brings me to sort of the last points that I've got to bring up about the moon landings and why I don't believe they could be faked. To fake the moon landings, to actually land on the moon, took an amazing amount of people. There were engineers working at private companies designing stuff. There are advances in technology that we actually benefited from for this. There were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people involved at mission control. There were the astronauts themselves. And if you want to do a movie set, you don't just do it with the astronauts. It's not going to be all the astronauts out there running around throwing fake rocks down and playing around and getting it right. There's going to be physicists involved to make sure all these details I just went over were correct. There's going to be scientists involved to make sure that they have something for the Van Allen radiation belt so they can say why that works. There's going to be some dude out there who's accidentally making the flag wave in the wind and not thinking about it. There's going to be someone else out there who's making sure every footprint that we see on the moon matches, because that's the other thing. It's got to be done on a stage. You've got to make sure that these footprints and everything like that doesn't change. You've got to be super careful about everything, okay? And just think about that. There's no wind on the moon, so these footprints aren't changing. They all have to remain the same, yet in every photo we see they do, unless someone's walked there and then it changes. But if this is a set, if they're standing up and saying, hey, Neil, head over there, let's take your picture, there's going to be someone who might run over and like put his helmet on or do something or give him a drink because, hell, he's thirsty. It's been a 10-hour shoot, and, you know, he's like, what the hell, guys? Give me an ice-cold soda. I'm not on the moon. I'm here, and I don't know where everybody thinks they filmed it, but I'm here in this black site, and they're going to run out to him with the soda. He's going to pop it. He's going to drink it. He's going to throw it on the ground. They're going to be like, Neil, no. They're going to have to pull that up, reset all the footprints. It's just crazy. We're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people, and none of them spilled the beans. None of them. How do you get people to do that? What do you have against them that's keeping them from doing this? I don't even know if you can do it. I don't even know if it's possible to keep that many people silent, but somehow they did. And best of all, now get this. Our mortal enemy at the time, the Soviet Union, in the middle of the Cold War, what would be the most embarrassing thing they could do to the United States of America? Prove the moon landings were faked. If the Soviet Union could have done it, they would have done it. And we are talking about one of the most sophisticated counterintelligence spying nations in the world. If you think that the U.S. military is a thing to be reckoned with, the Soviets' spying abilities were outrageous. They could do things that we probably still, well, we can probably do them now, but like when the Soviet Union collapsed, there were spy technologies and things that just blew people away. And yet somehow, with all of these technologies, with all of these techniques, with all of these people trying their hardest to embarrass the United States of America, they could not prove that the moon landings were faked. And by God, if they could prove that they were faked, they would have done it. So why didn't the Soviets do it? Were we all working together? Like, were the U.S. and Soviets faking the whole Cold War? Was this all made up? Was JFK not really assassinated? Maybe he's sitting in a bunker right now listening to me talk, and this whole thing is just, I don't even know. But yeah, folks, like, the moon landings must have happened if you look at it from this. If you look at all the facts, if you look at the physics, if you look at everything like that, it would actually be easier at the time to go to the moon, film everything there, and then come back, because it's just a crazy amount of technology we would have had to invent, and it didn't exist at the time. So that's why I believe the moon landings actually happened. I know some of you guys are probably going to disagree with me, so feel free to comment down below on why I'm wrong, but this is my case for the moon landings and why they happened. Hopefully it makes sense. I'm not a physicist, I'm not a scientist, I'm just a computer engineer, and all I can tell you is at that time, none of the computers that I program now would even have, like, interacted with these computers on the spaceship, so I can't tell you anything about that. But just use a little bit of common sense, use a little bit of reasoning, think about how things are now, and think about how they were back in the day, and think about how hard a lot of this stuff was. If you wanted to fake a moon landing right now, you could do it. It would probably cost you as much as it cost James Cameron to film Avatar, but you could probably do it. But back in the day, that price would be much, much, much higher, and it would be easier to go to the moon, so why not just go? Anyways, thanks for watching. Until next time, peace.